Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast. I'm Jason Haas. I am super excited to have Amber Lebeau joining me for the conversation today. She is the author of Spitbucket blog, which I think is an absolute must-read. And she's also started a virtual wine events website where she's been able to pull together a lot of the new things that people are doing in this era of shutdowns and stay at home and COVID. So I'm interested to talk to her about that, talk to her about which of these trends that we're seeing are likely to be durable, which ones are hopefully going to go away when life gets a little more back to normal. But before we do that, as usual, as people are joining, I would like to take you on a little tour of what's going on in the vineyard and in the winery right now. So I'm going to start with our animals. We just a couple weeks ago got a couple of new rams. These are Dorper rams, so it's an heirloom hair breed of sheep. We always try to bring in new rams every year to make sure we have good genetic diversity in the flock. And these guys are beautiful. So anyway, I thought I'd share a picture. Because I've been trying to go to... Oh, actually, one more thing. Before I get away from the animals, I'm going to show you this is our mobile chicken coop. I love the little max occupancy 20 that somebody spray painted on it a couple of years ago. So this allows us to move our chickens around the vineyard, get a little dose of nitrogen when we need to. It's pretty awesome. I don't know if you can see the chicken at the bottom there, but they're sheltering in the shade, even though it's a cool, breezy day today. So I've been trying to bring you to different parts of the vineyard each week, because I know a lot of you have been tuning in every week. So this time I decided to walk along the creek bed through a low-lying block. This is a head-trained, dry-farmed Counoise block that we planted about 15 years ago. You can see one of the Counoise vines there. Counoise is a great grape for dry farming because it grows upright, it's pretty vigorous, doesn't need any support. Just a close-up of what the Counoise berries look like right now. They look great. We're still pretty early in the growing season. We're at least a month away from veraison. So the berries are still growing in size. They're still hard and pea-sized and bright green. One of the other things I like from that spot is I'm just across Las Tablas Creek from the Scruffy Hill block that I took you to a couple of weeks ago. If you look up at the very top up to the top of that would be where I'm normally taking Scruffy Hill pictures from, but hopefully this gives you a sense of how steep it is. It's about a 35-degree slope, really pretty rugged and amazing. I mentioned that it is kind of cool and breezy today. I'm not sure how well this shows up. It actually came up pretty well. So this is a picture looking west to the Santa Lucia Mountains. So people who wonder what the real key is to the Paso Robles climate, it's these mountains. You can see the fog peeking fingers over top of the mountains, but those get up to about 3,000 feet. The winery here is at about 1,500 feet elevation. We're only 10 miles from the Pacific, but those mountains act as a barrier. So that's what allows it to be sunny here, allows us to ripen Rhone varieties, and when you get this onshore flow weather pattern like this, you can see that fog coming over the mountains. I think it's really, really cool. I'm going to show you... You can see, again, a little bit of the fog here. This is a Vermentino block, just to give you a sense of the different vigor of some of the different grapes. I'm looking in between two Vermentino rows, and you'll notice if you look left that there's some rows that are a lot less vigorous. Those are Roussanne. So when somebody talks about a grape being high vigor or low vigor, this is, I think, as good an example as you can find of a grape which is high vigor, Vermentino, next to a grape which is low vigor, which is Roussanne. In the kind of non-vineyard pieces of what we're doing, some big news for us. I don't know how exciting this is for anyone else, but we are deep into a construction project. We're building a new wine storage building that's going to be solar powered, super well insulated. It's allow us to replace the old pole barn that we're currently using to store our stock here. It'll mean we'll have to take less trips back and forth to town, fewer trucks, less energy, more efficient. I'll hopefully have a picture in another month or so of walls and other exciting stuff. And then one more as I was walking back from the top of what we call the New Hill to the winery. This is used to be a Chardonnay block that we grafted to Counoise about a decade ago. I grew up in Vermont. I remember somebody saying that really the only thing that Vermont grows very well is rocks, because every time you plow it, rocks come to the surface. Paso Robles, not really that different. You can see these are bits of limestone in the topsoil that have gotten turned up as we've run the tractors through here, and they're now just sort of in between the vines every row. Okay, a couple quick pictures in the cellar. We are working on blending. The cellar, we're trying to free up barrels so that when we get to harvest, we'll have space to put the new wines. You can see some of our stainless steel barrels there. These are some of our larger 1,200-gallon fooders on the right and 600-gallon mini fooders on the left. We're also still aging all of our 2018 reds, the later, the longer aging stuff. So Panoply and Esprit, those are still in Foudre. And then one last piece of news. Some of you probably read my blog this week. I was writing about some of the newly arrived higher acid Rhone whites. So we have two of them that we just released to wine club members, Picardin and Clairette Blanche. We'll have Picpoul coming up next month, and Bourbelanc, our first ever Bourbelanc, the month after. But if you're interested in a little bit of the backstory here, that's what I dive into in the blog, and I make the case that it's really a function of what the weather was like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the fact that it was those were relatively cool decades, and the fact that the international wine market was looking for wines that were as big and lush and floral and fruity as possible, that led to the decline of these grapes in favor of things like Viognier and Roussanne. And with modern preferences turning back towards wines of acid, I think that it is time for these grapes to shine again. Okay, that was my quick tour. I'm going to invite Amber to join. I'm waiting for her to join me. She's going to be joining me from Paris, which I think is very, very cool. Hey, Amber.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
How are things in Paris?
It is really muggy. I was actually thinking of going outside because we still have light till about 10 p.m., but we've been having thunderstorms, and so with the humidity, it's been kind of
Are things starting to get a little more back to normal after the COVID lockdowns?
a little bit. France, I mean, we took some really draconian measures early on with shutting everything down, and I think that has paid big dividends. I mean, the cafes are starting to get back. I mean, they're still practicing social distancing. You know, you're very much encouraged to wear a mask, and most people do wear a mask. You know, going out grocery shopping and things like that. So it's slowly. I haven't done like going on the metro and stuff because for me personally, I don't know if I want to do that just yet. But the parks are open. You know, shops are open.
Yeah, I think you're right that pain at the beginning of really locking things down. I mean, certainly you look at the difference in the trend lines of the curves in places that did that and places that did not do that, like most of the United States. I think it's pretty clear that you're reaping the benefits now, or you will over the coming months.
Yes, most definitely. I mean, it's again, it sucks. Lockdown sucks. Wearing masks sucks, but getting back to normalcy sooner, it feels good. It makes the sacrifice more worth it versus just backsliding into, oh great, we got to do this all over again.
Yeah, I mean, like in California, the Governor Newsom announced that bars in several counties have to close. Beaches are closing this weekend again. I'm worried. SLO County is so far in pretty good shape, but it's not like we're an island with a moat around us. I mean, we are subject to the same trends as everybody else is. So our tasting rooms have been able to be open now for 2 weeks. I very much hope it can stay open, but I don't think there's any guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, there is still a lot of unknowns. I mean, especially once travel restrictions are lifted. The EU has been finalizing that with what countries you can travel to and what countries are going to allow people in. I mean, even the countries on the safe list, well, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Well, on that cheerful note,
Yeah.
So can you, I don't know how well people necessarily know you, are the people who follow Tablas Creek. I've certainly tried to turn as many people as I can onto your blog because I think it's just beautifully written and fascinating and touches on all the all the important stuff that I hope people would be thinking about. But how did you get started in writing a blog? You haven't been doing it for all that long. You started in 16, right? Is that right?
Yeah, but truthfully, I mean, seriously writing probably only like 2017, 2018. It really, the blog kind of started as a study tool for me. I'm working on my WSET diploma. Eventually I'd like to work towards a Master of Wine, and I needed something to help me focus. And, you know, my background, you know, I've done a lot of different things in the wine industries, you know, retail side, working at wineries. And, you know, I wanted to kind of bring that perspective from all those different things, but also that customer perspective, because I think that's often missing, because you do have consumer blogs and you do have industry blogs, but you really don't have that mix. And I kind of felt like I could bring a little bit of that mix in.
I think those are some of my favorite pieces that you write, pieces where you're basically like, okay, looking at this from a consumer's perspective, what were you thinking, winery? What were you thinking, wine shop? Yeah, I think those are great. Are those pieces particularly fun to write? Are there sorts of pieces that you do that you particularly enjoy?
Truthfully, the pieces that I enjoy the most are my just geeky pieces, like just geeking out about a grape variety or a region. And those are things I have the most fun with. But I understand that those are the ones that have such a limited audience. So I kind of try to balance the spread between, you know, where I just geek out and where I talk, okay, this is some serious things that we need to talk about with the industry. You know, let's deal with that. So.
How did you get into wine in the first place? Did you grow up with wine?
No, not particularly. I know my grandfather in Missouri, he ran several restaurants. And so kind of that rite of passage, you know, everybody worked at grandpa's restaurant. And so that was like early. But truthfully, my first wines, you know, local Missouri wines, you know, Sweet Things, St. James Velvet Red, and the like there. I really didn't get into wine until my wife. My wife actually helped introduce me to wine with that. We lived in Florida, and, you know, she had friends that were big into wine. And, you know, we went to Disney World and Epcot Center, where they had all the different pavilions of different countries, and each one had a different wine. And that was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Germany, France, Italy. And so just kind of segued from there.
Huh, cool. And so what else? You say you've worked for wineries. I know you worked in wine shops for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get your start in the business?
So in the business, I would say, I mean, after working with my grandfather's restaurants, I really didn't want to deal anything with hospitality. After that, you kind of get burnt. So I started working retail, actually Office Depot, not even wine retail. When I got sick of doing that, of selling printers and all that good stuff, I went over to started going to school. And I realized, you know, with finishing my degree, and there was at the school I went to, they had a wine program. So I started doing more aspects of wine and just fell in love with that. And that opened up my opportunity to do winery internships. At the Northwest Wine Academy, there was people, Regina Danielle, who was a fantastic wine instructor there. She really inspired me on teaching and with teaching about wine. And I kind of went head over heels with that. As much as I enjoyed making wine, I realized that that's a lot of work. And I like talking about wine a little bit more than making wine. And so I went to work at different areas, grocery store chains, Safeway, with wine shops. Total Wine was probably the big one. I spent a lot of time at Total Wine. And there I went from working at the floor to also doing a lot of teaching for them with staff training. Total Wine and More sent me down to California actually multiple times to help open up that market and train the staff there. And so it just kind of kept spiraling. You know, it's like you get a little bit of a nibble and then you just keep going and going and going.
Cool. I can definitely second that thought.
Yeah.
So you've been in Paris now for a little more than a year?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Are there aspects of the wine culture there that have surprised you, or that you thought were particularly interesting, or a particularly interesting contrast to the wine culture here in the States?
Well, it didn't necessarily surprise me, but it was interesting seeing it in reality of just how insular it is. I mean, I'm lucky being in Paris in that, you know, you can get wines from multiple regions of France, but it's kind of tough finding non-French wines in Paris. When you go to wine shops there, you really, really got to hunt for it. And if you do find the other areas, it's like a single shelf. which you can't necessarily blame the French. I mean, obviously they have an abundance of great wine. The thing that shocked me the most, though, was the apéro culture. You know, in Paris, from what I've heard, this is very similar to a lot of the different cities there. You know, before dinner, after work, there's time where everybody go and has drinks in the cafes. But they're not always drinking wine there. It's more cocktails. It's more beer. And that was hugely eye-opening because of all the areas that you think, that especially for young people, because a lot of it is the younger generations that are doing these apéros, you think wine would be second nature for them. But they're moving towards, you know, cocktails, again, were huge on that. So that was really eye-opening on that.
So one of the things I think maybe people don't realize is that if you look a generation ago in France, it would have been much more overwhelmingly wine to what was drunk than it is now. But in France, the per capita wine consumption is actually declining. It's declined over recent decades. And it's really worries a lot of the people particularly in the domestic French market. I mean, the people who have access to international markets, that's not a problem. And there's certainly good demand for French wines around the world. But for a lot of the people who were just growing grapes, selling them to the local cooperatives, the cooperatives were bottling them, were being sold in local markets to local people. That a lot of that business has just disappeared. And it's one of the things which has spurred a lot of the pulling out of vines in a lot of the parts of the south of France. It's really changed the focus of the business to a much more export-focused, international-focused model.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you know, especially as the older generation passes away, I mean, it's going to continue. But yeah, the lack of adoption for younger, I mean, I've heard about it in the U.S. and there's other reasons why we're thinking about it within the U.S., but just still seeing that same trend here, I wasn't quite expecting that.
Yeah. Yeah, and your comment about French wine shops is funny too. I remember noticing that the first time it came in. You go to a great French wine shop and you have a section for Bordeaux, a section for Burgundy, a section for the Loire, a section for the Rhone, and then the rest of the world is like 3 bottles wide, and it's
pretty much
mostly Italian wines, and like maybe you'll find something from Germany. Like, that's it.
Yep, exactly.
So what have you been drinking recently that you've been excited about?
The Languedoc Roussillon area. I mean, that area is just phenomenal with just the values there.
Yeah.
You know,
that's one of the reasons. That's one of the regions where it used to support basically a domestic market for inexpensive wines, and since that's collapsed, there's been a lot of downward pressure on prices.
Yeah, and there's still definitely that downward pressure, but the quality, the bang for the buck, is way over delivering. I mean, bottles that I can get for 8 to 13 euros drink easily on par with $20-$25 US bottles on it. And it just consistently surprises me how good those wines are.
Cool. Yeah, it's such an exciting region. It's so beautiful too. Have you gotten a chance to go down there and travel around Languedoc?
No. Every time that we've wanted to travel, we've either had strikes. we had a long strike that blew up a lot of our plans, or we had some travel to the U.S. I needed to do, and then of course COVID. So pretty much our travel plans, it's almost like Murphy's Law. If I plan to go somewhere in France, I got something that jumped up ahead of me. So.
Okay, no more plans.
I probably have to, yeah.
So talk a little bit about the virtual wine events site and tool that you and your wife built during this lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with France going early into lockdown in early March, pretty much right after Italy, obviously that just kind of put everything to a slowdown. Couldn't go out, couldn't do anything. And so like a lot of the wine people, started turning to more online activities. And then as other regions followed suit, California locking down, wineries themselves started providing a lot of these things. And 2 problems quickly emerged. It was like, one, how do you find these events? Because unless you're actively following a winery, like, following Tablas Creek here, you're not going to get the realized Instagram live notifications of what they're going to do. You have to actively be following that winery to know usually what's going on. And then once you realize all these different things that are happening, how do you keep track of them? And so I was looking around, there's other websites that, used to, keep track of, wine events, and they weren't really posting things about those online wine events. And nobody was really stepping into that that gap. You know, there was a blogger friend I had in the UK that had his own personal calendar that he shared with people, but that was almost it. And so my wife was the one that actually realized that the domain names, virtual wine events or online wine events, both of those were open. Nobody's claimed them. So that told us that nobody was probably going to step into this niche unless we did ourselves. And so that's what we've been working on for the last couple of months.
Super cool. How many events are now listed on your site?
So we've passed the 2,100 event mark.
That's so cool.
Yeah, there's been a lot of events.
Talk about the right idea at the right time.
Yeah. I mean, the number of events are decreasing a little bit as things are opening up. But I do think the quality level of the events have rise. It's kind of separating the shade from the wheat. You know, the ones that have realized how effectively they can use this tool are continuing to do these events, while those that were just kind of floundering have gone by the wayside.
Yeah, it's a little bit like with wine blogs 10 years ago. I mean, I think every winery started a wine blog 10 years ago, and half of the wine lovers in the country and people realized, you know, this is actually work. You've got to figure out how to do this. You've got to build your audience. So, yeah, I think it's a natural process. But I know that we have decided that maybe we won't do them with the frequency that we've done them in the last 3 months, but that it's a really important piece to continue of the mix of ways that we connect with customers. Because even as things open back up, tasting room opens back up, not everybody's ready to get back on the road and travel. And even so, we can do a lot more to get to where our customers are instead of just asking them to come to us where we are. Mm-hmm. So I feel like even when things do get fully back to normal, whenever that happens in a year or whatever, that this will still be an important part of that mix.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, the reach that you can have on doing these online events and doing them well, you can't replicate that easily in person. I mean, it's kind of both cases. You know, the in-person experience, you will never be able to replicate that online. I think that's why virtual tastings kind of have some struggles, because they're trying to replicate that tasting room experience, but you're not going to be able to do that. What you need to focus on is creating your own unique online experience, which you can't replicate in person. You know, taking those behind the scenes looks, like what you're doing with taking people into the vineyard. That's not as easy to do all the time when in person and you've got different groups coming in and out, but yet you can do that and you should show 30, 40, 50, 100 people at a time these behind the scenes looks that, you know, people would pay money to have this personal in-person experience to do. You can kind of replicate that a little bit with doing online. And then just globally, you know, instead of being reliant on all those people that walk through your door, you can reach a wine lover in the UK, in France, South Africa, Australia, that when they do travel or when they do see your wines in different markets, they have a connection now with you that they ordinarily would not have had.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think this drove home to me at the beginning is that, I mean, even when we were traveling, we would go and do 10 or 15 trips a year to different parts of the United States, and we'd host a dinner or a tasting there, and we'd send out a note to people within 20 miles of where it was happening, and some people would come. But still, if you think of the percentage of even our current customers who really had the opportunity to see us at an event, it was pretty small, and the percentage of potential customers is even smaller. So I like your way of phrasing that in saying that you're not trying to replicate the in-person event, you're trying to put together an event that's compelling in its own right. Yeah. I think that's a smart way of thinking about it. Are what sorts of things that have sprung up in this COVID lockdown period do you think are going to be the most durable?
So I think the ones that are collaboration events, like you have a topic of, you know, let's describe, you know, Rhone Rangers. You know, if the Rhone Rangers were to do like a webinar with having different people come in to talk about the different grape varieties and their experience, I think, you know, those things, when I just see the events that get a lot of click and buzz, things that often have different people pulled in from different parts of the world, that's going to continue, because that is just such an immense just experience that, again, people don't usually get. You can't get that going to a tasting room, of hearing the insights from winemakers from several different areas all at once and be able to ask them questions and have those questions respond. So I do think, I think regional AVA associations should take more advantage of that. And then also, varietal associations, things like that should definitely do a lot more with that. Another thing I can see going on is more the social aspect of, there's some wineries that were doing online book clubs or trivia games, drinking games, things like that. I can see those going on a little well. It's just like another, fun community building aspect of it that, even people that have never heard of your wine before, it's like, oh yeah, they're the ones that did this one fun event I did. Kind of help spread that brand awareness, kind of sneaking it in with being, host of these kind of fun events. I can see those continuing. But for the most part, I do think the events that are going to have the most staying power are, the webinar aspects, more so than I say the virtual tastings.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And just looking at the sorts of things that I've been a part of that have gotten a big response, it has been things like that. Like I did a thing for the California Wine Institute with Elaine Brown and Bob Lindquist, where we were kind of talking about the early days of the Rhone movement and the Rhone movement in California and the Central Coast, and we had people from all over the world as a part of it, and it was super fun and compelling.
I mean, there are some places like in the UK, 67 Pall Mall has just done a brilliant business model with sending out the small samples. They're able to send it within the UK, but also within the EU. So they will have events and bring in people from everywhere across the globe. And the quality of their events stand out. If you're in the US watching and you don't have the samples, you still get a lot from that webinar with the personalities that's being presented, the moderation of it. But those that are in the UK and the EU that can get the samples to go with it, I mean, they're having, a tremendous experience. And they keep, the samples will range anywhere from, 40 to 60 pounds to, they had, I believe, Harlan from Napa, 600 pounds for like a 6 wine sample kit. And people bought it. People had a great time on it. So there's going to be some people that are able to continue to do that and do that really well.
So from a winery perspective, are there, like, I thought that your blog on how not to respond to customers' COVID concerns was spot on. Are there lessons you feel like wineries can take or should take from the last 3 months of being closed and of reopening and connecting with customers in different ways? Are there what do you think a smart winery would be paying attention to right now?
Well, I hope that the one big lesson that they took was that need to find other ways to reach customers. I think the days of bellying up to the bar at tasting rooms, visiting 6-7 tasting rooms in a day, those are long gone. I think the move to appointment onlys and those more curated experiences is overall going to be positive, but that's always going to be reducing the amount of people that you reach. So finding these other avenues to reach consumers and the importance of doing that needs to be a long-term lesson that sinks in. In general, and also this kind of goes a little bit with generationals when you think of like the millennials and reaching younger generations, is we got to move from our marketing perspective of just trying to bank on impulse, getting that impulse buy, to encouraging people to shop with intention. Now, when I talk about impulse buy, think about things with Instagram. Like I rail all the time about bottle porn. How many people, wineries' Instagram feeds are nothing but stupid bottle shots. Because they do that because they're told, it's hammered into their head by marketing departments for years of brand awareness, top of mind. The more people see your label, the more they'll think, when they go to that wall of wine, they'll see your label like a halo effect because they saw it, 80 times on Instagram. That doesn't really happen. I'm not going to say it never happens, but as somebody that has worked in the trenches at retail stores and seen how customers respond when they go to that wall of wine with their eyes glazing over, they're not going to remember that bottle that they saw 80 times on Instagram. They're either going to go with something that they know and they've personally already had, or they'll ask, they could ask an associate, or they'll text a friend for advice. That happens so often. Or they'll walk away. So if you're a winery that you want to reach new customers and you think the way that you're going to reach those new customers is just by doing bottle porn and spamming your Instagram, no, you're not. You're going to reach customers by showing your personality, your passion, the brand, the people behind the brand that make people want to say, I want to learn more about Tablas Creek. I want to learn more about domain such and such. That when they're at that wine shop and their eyes are glazing over at that wall of wine, they will ask, hey, do you have this? They shop with intention versus just relying on impulse. And that's going to be something going forward. It's going to have to continue. I mean, only the big mega corporations that have the marketing budget to really spam and can use that top of mind marketing effectively. For smaller wineries, you really need to sell yourself and get people to look for your wine specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about social media is that people have to choose to follow you.
Yep.
And so if you're not providing content that they find interesting and appealing, if it looks like you're just promoting yourself, or all you're doing is just throwing out one bottle photo after another, if it's good at all, it's only a short-term thing. You're not building your audience, you're not building connection with that audience, you're not deepening the connection that you have. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, social media it's an escape for most of us. It's a distraction. It's what we do when we're sitting in the doctor's office waiting for an appointment, or we're lying in bed where we should be sleeping. We're scrolling through our phones. We're looking for something to entertain us. And God, I can't remember who told me this, but sometime long ago, somebody said your goal of every post on social media should be either to make people smile or surprise them. The 2 S's. So like you're showing baby goats. Freak yeah, that's great. I mean, it makes people smile, or something that surprises them. Like, oh, I didn't know about this. And so every post, that should be the goal and intent, not just on Instagram, but same with Facebook. You know, Twitter should be more conversation, more back and forth, like, you know, give people a chance to talk to you and say, hey, there's real people behind this brand. But definitely with Instagram and Facebook, it should be, you know, make them smile or surprise them.
Awesome. I feel like that is a great point and lesson to end on. We're at half an hour. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add? You should tell people the names of the websites and the blog and the URL. So if people want to connect with you, how do they do it?
Yeah. Well, you can always email me if anybody has any questions or just want to geek out. Amber@spitbucket.net. And that's the blog, spitbucket.net. My Twitter handles, Instagram handle is Spitbucket blog. And then the website, virtualwineevents.com on that.
So cool. Well, thank you so much, Amber. I appreciate you joining me from 6,000 miles away. I'm sorry that it took a pandemic to do it, but thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for writing stuff that I want to read every week.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You guys take care.
Thanks, Amber. And thank you, everybody. Again, I'll be back do this every Wednesday at noon Pacific. So hopefully I will see you next week. Thanks again, Amber.